What's the difference between an average teacher and a dynamic teacher? To answer this question, I go back to a famous quote in education, which says, teaching is like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire, the teacher's on fire, and the entire world is on fire, including your class. An average teacher will probably go and find a fire extinguisher or call the fire department. But a dynamic teacher is actually the fire chief. He or she knows how fires are made, how fires spread, what's going to spark a fire before it happens, but most importantly, they have all the tools to make sure that their community, which is their classroom, stays fire-free. In this video, I'm going to give you actionable steps so you can put out those fires, see those fires before they come, and be able to keep your classroom fire-free. These insights will show you the best way to become a dynamic teacher, so you can accomplish the things that you want to in your classroom, and also feel that sense of pride that you deserve to have as a teacher. If you're feeling frustrated because your students are not making the gains that you want them to, then get my free guide on 20 ways to energize your classroom and start feeling the fulfillment that teachers feel and the pride that they feel in their students reaching their goals that the best teachers in America utilizing these methods do. The first thing that teachers need to realize is that they need to be likable in order for them to be an effective teacher. If students don't like you, they're not going to respond to you. They're not going to resonate with the things that you do and trying to teach them. If they don't like you, they're not going to listen to you. So you have to be likable. Now, you might be asking yourself, be likable. These kids are in a certain age range and I'm much older. But there's certain qualities that you have that your friends like about you. So be yourself. If you're trying to be that almighty teacher and that disciplinarian that reprimands the kids all the time, they're not going to like you. Now, I'm not saying you can't give the kids discipline. You can't reprimand kids. You could. But if they like you, they're going to accept it more from you and you're going to get better responses from them. So find out what it is that makes you likable. Ask your family members. Ask your friends. Say, hey, what is it about me that you guys like? It might be your humor. It might be the way you do certain things. Whatever it is, everyone is unique. There's something that makes you likable. Utilize those things and let the kids see that, because the kids can see when you're being phony. We think they don't, but they see everything. And if you're yourself, if you're likable, they're going to respond more to you. Now, let's talk about what students do like. If you think about it, most of the kids these days on their free time, they get on social media. They get on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, they get on these different platforms. And what is it that they like about these platforms? They go to these platforms because they want to laugh, they want to smile, and they also want things to talk about. If you give them these things, but from a real life person, which is you, they're going to like you more. So you have to compete with these social media outlets. Listen, if you're a terrible dancer, create a dance contest in your class. And it doesn't have to take up the entire class, or if kids are doing a dance, do the dance with them. It's okay to be goofy. It shows that you are yourself and you're likable. It also gives them something to talk about. So you can be viral, but in a real way. In other words, instead of being viral, be actual. Be something that they talk about. Give them something to talk about. Give them something to like. So if you take a look at all these social media outlets and what they're giving kids, remember, you can give them the same thing, but in real life, give them something to talk, smile, and laugh about. A recent study highlighted that most students are looking for two things: excitement and independence. Let's talk about excitement. Students want excitement. That's the reason why they go on these social media platforms. You can provide these things for them in your class. Excitement comes from things that are unexpected and high energy, things that surprise them that they weren't expecting at all. They say, wow, they put all of their brain power into that because they want to understand how this phenomenon happened, how this thing came to be, who was engaged in it, and who am I going to tell about what I just saw. Your classroom lessons could be the same way. This is what I did. Your classroom lessons always have to be something that's unexpected and exciting. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in this video, but keep that in mind. Excitement is what these kids are looking for. Now, let's talk about independence. Students have that independence when they're on social media on their phones because they have the independence to select what video they want to take a look at. They have that power. You see, students don't like to be controlled, but we have to control the classroom some way or another. But the fact that they have the option is what makes them want to engage with that video because they chose to engage in that video. Therefore, they're committed to watch that video to try to find out what they can talk about and what they want to laugh about. The same thing can happen in your classroom. You need to have multiple options for a lesson, especially if the lesson has something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later called a burning issue or a burning question. If you give them options to do something and they get a chance to pick, they're going to be more committed to accomplishing that. Therefore, you're going to have kids participating and engaging in your classroom much more than you were if you only had one option and you're forcing it on them. This is the difference between a dynamic teacher and an average teacher. A dynamic teacher can control their class without appearing like a dictator. Have you ever seen somebody walking their dog? They're walking their dog, the dog is in front, sniffing around, rummaging around, doing certain things, and the owner's in the back with the leash. At that moment in time, the dog feels like they're free. They don't feel like they're controlled by the owner. So they're walking around, sniffing around, doing different things, getting ready to do their business. But at that moment, they feel free and alive. But the dog doesn't really notice that this owner is in control because the owner is dictating where they walk, what time of the day they walk, when they choose to walk and cross the street, when they choose to stop, all these different things. But the dog is oblivious to it because they have a certain level of independence. This is the same dynamics that happens in the class. A dynamic teacher gives these students a level of independence in their classroom, although they're really controlling the class. You don't have to have explicit control in your class. You can have a certain level of control where the students feel a little bit free with what they're doing in the classroom. So if you want to be a dynamic teacher, make sure you find ways where the students have a certain level of choice, where they get engaged with their choice that they picked to engage in this lesson. So they're learning and having fun and excitement and independence at the same time. So now let's talk about a dynamic game plan for your classroom. The first thing I will tell you is don't reveal what the lesson is first. You need to have that level of excitement and anticipation from these students. It should always be a surprise because the students like surprises because it's fun. So you want to start with a burning issue. Think about your lesson plan and think about what it is you're trying to teach them. Look at the standards, look at what the goals are, and then think of a burning issue. What is it that these students want to learn regarding that? So it's going to take a little bit of thought, but it's not impossible. I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. Let me give you an example. When I taught middle school, I needed to teach students how to proofread. And I said to myself, how in the world am I going to get these kids to proofread their work and them enjoy it? I thought it was impossible, but then I kind of thought about what I'm saying here about a burning issue. So I said to myself, let me start with a question. So I started the class by asking, how many of you here want to be rich and famous? Half the class raised their hand. Then I said, how many of you here would like to have a nice car when you grow up? About 99% of the class raised their hand, except that kid that wasn't paying attention, but then he quickly realized what I was talking about, and then he raised his hand. So I said, if you want to be rich and famous or buy a car, before you purchase that car, you need to sign a contract. But if you don't read the contract, that person might be charging you high interest, might give you a price that you're not looking for, or they might try to swindle you or trick you in some kind of way. Don't you want to learn how to avoid that? Because if you want that car, you don't want to get a nice car and have to pay so much money that you can't even afford the car and then have the car repossessed and given back to the company. And they said, no, they didn't want that. So that was the burning issue. They want to know how not to be tricked with a contract when they go buy a car, because most of these kids in that class, I realized they were into cars and talking about cars or being rich and famous. This was their interest. This was their burning issue. And now I'm giving them insight into something that they might need in order to get those dreams and realities realized. So I said, if you want to look at a contract, you need to be able to proofread it to make sure that that contract is solid, to make sure you get the money you need when you're rich and famous, or to make sure that they don't tack on certain charges that you don't want to pay for. And then I will give them some examples of some charges that people give you when you're trying to buy a car. They give you all these different fees that you don't need, and you're spending extra money per month that you can be spending on something else that's fun, like going to the movies or hanging out with your friends and things of that nature. All these things are of value for these students. And I mention these things because this is what they're interested in. So after setting all of that up, then I start talking to them about proofreading. These are the elements of proofreading. This is the process for you to proofread certain documents. Do you guys want to get started? Or I didn't really ask them that, but I knew from their faces, they wanted to get started. So the entire class that I taught about proofreading, what they had in their mind is, I'm going to utilize this to make sure that my contract is correct, that people don't trick me into paying certain things or losing some money. When I found that burning issue, I was able to keep them locked into the class lesson and them learn as much as they can and had all of their attention focused on that one thing. It also gave me an advantage because when I needed to review proofreading to make sure they knew the elements of proofreading, I brought up the car and I brought up the contract. That automatically gave them an indication of what I was talking about because it was a link to some past experience that they had. It was a link to some past thought that they had in their mind, which I created with the car and with the being rich and famous. That caused a synapse in their brain, and that neurocommunication started happening. If you want to learn more about neurocommunication, click on this link above, and I will give you the video that I created before that talks about neurocommunication and causing a synapse in a student's brain to kind of jumpstart their memory. If you enjoyed this information, feel free to put your comments down below. Also, subscribe to my channel so you can get more content like this. If you haven't picked up my free guide, 20 Ways to Energize the Classroom, click the link below and pick that up today. It's going to help you energize your class. Until next time, my name is Dr. Richies, and stay dynamic.